Hi, I'm Dennis Hudson, and I'm not here today to sell you anything. In fact, the direction I'm going to point you in is going to be to get something for free that will help you and your family, especially your kids. Please watch this video. It's important. I hope to make it the best video you've ever seen on YouTube, or at least the most important. This is about medicine and healthcare and how to turn your kid into an at-home medical researcher. I am not kidding you. Stay tuned. Now, if you're like me, you don't like people who wave their credentials around just to impress people. They get on my last nerve. In fact, if you look at any of my videos, you'll see I have almost never mentioned anything about my background. But I am going to be talking here about something so controversial in medicine, in medical science, that I just have to step up and talk about myself some, so that you know I'm not just your average nutbag. I'm a nutbag with a little background. Okay, to start off, I began my professional life way back in the 1960s at a little biologicals company up in Michigan, Detroit in fact, and we were in the business of making culture media for other biological companies. I moved on from there to work for General Electric. I took another piece of my background and I went to work for them in engineering research. My job was very exacting work and involved identification and quantization of particles that were formed during high pressure and high temperature operations. And that skill in quantitative analysis and theory would later come into play after I retired from medicine. I practiced medicine for a great many years. I'm basically your country doc and practiced out in the hinterlands much of my career. I've also had the honor to serve as the president of 2 medical colleges during my career. And I'm a doctor of Oriental medicine, just so you know. And a lot of people don't understand there's an awful lot more to that than just acupuncture and needles, believe it. I'm retired, or I guess I'm semi-retired. It's kind of like, medicine is kind of like working for certain unnamed government agencies. Just when you think you're out, they pull you back in. You know what I mean? Well, medicine is like that too, and I owe a debt, and I feel called to come back and share my knowledge. But let's get back to my earlier career, which is more in the exact sciences of engineering research. I am a no-nonsense, hardcore exact sciences type of person. Before medicine, my background was in chemistry, mathematics, and physics. Okay, now you're about to see why I needed to tell you all of that, because as I say, I didn't want you to think I'm just your average nutbag. I'm an above average nutbag. So the reason for that is that what I'm going to talk about is so controversial medically that you needed to know that I'm speaking to you from a place of the exact sciences and medicine. And the subject matter that I want to take up right now is called homeopathic medicine and homeopathic drugs. Now please don't stop the video because you heard that word. There's a reason why it's controversial, and I'm going to show you why, and I'm going to show you something from a Nobel Prize winning scientist on this subject. And you can look this up. This is Dr. Luc Montagnier, and he's done some research into, he was by the way, he got the Nobel Prize jointly with someone else as co-discoverer of the HIV virus. And he got that, I think, in 2004, and since then, he has ventured into the area of what is called water memory, and his results are stunning, and they relate directly to homeopathic medicine. So, There's a reason why you're hearing a lot of opposition to it and a lot of people calling it pseudoscience. But when you see Dr. Montagnier's research, you will understand that there is a reality here. But before we do that, I want you to know I'm here to persuade you to do two things. One, I'd like you to become knowledgeable and become possibly an at-home researcher yourself, but absolutely I'd like you to turn your kids into at-home homeopathic drug researchers. You can do it all for free, and I show you how, I show you where the tools are. Now I think that my bias here is I'm talking mainly to women, but guys, you have kids too, and you have a stake in this whole thing of healthcare and research. So, you know, you'd want to pay attention too, I would hope, but especially women. I got kind of inspired today. I watched Vice President Biden. Today happened to be the United State of Women Day at the White House, and he gave this really inspiring speech. And I realized just how important women are to this whole equation. Now, before I get into discussing Dr. Montagnier's research, first I want you to be able to understand why, when you go to Twitter, if you type in hashtag homeopathy, why you see these bashers of homeopathic drugs and therapy on there. And I want to cover that first, and then we'll get into the Montagnier video so that you have a better understanding of homeopathy and how it works. And then I'll point you to some things that you can do for yourself and for your kids and youth. Now in this next panel, you might wonder what U.S. prescription drug expenditures have to do with the bashing of homeopathic drugs. Well, it's pretty simple. Homeopathic drugs are very cheap and easy to make, and as I pointed out, the research I want to direct you to is at-home research with the simple things you have around the house. So as they say, all you got to do is follow the money, okay? Now if you look back at 1998, the United States was spending $73 billion on prescription drugs. By 2009, that had nearly quadrupled to $250 billion that Americans were spending on prescription drugs. Now I ask you, as a reasonable person, what do you think has happened in the past year, in 2015? How much did Americans spend on prescription drugs? I'm going to give you a minute just to look at that and take a wild guess where we are right now. Okay, if you guessed 300 billion or 350 billion or 400 billion dollars, you are wrong. Here is the true figure. Nearly $500 billion spent in 2015 by Americans on prescription drugs. So my point is, follow the money. When you see things that are saying bad things about homeopathic drugs, don't be fooled. They can dress it up to look like science and perfect logic. There is big money out there that has a stake in this game. Now, I said that I was probably speaking mainly to women, although I'm also speaking to men. And I'm going to get to how you make a homeopathic drug in just a minute, and I'm going to cover Dr. Montagnier's research, kind of a capsule of that, in just a minute too. But first, I want to talk about why the drug companies are targeting women in order to debunk homeopathy, and also why they're targeting women for financial reasons. So stay with me. Finance might be boring to some people, but you need to understand what's going on behind the curtain. So, in 2015, the drug companies, what I call the big dope dealers, spent $5.2 billion in 2015 to advertise just 5 drugs. Now that's a heck of a lot of money. But what did they spend it on? And here are the top 5 drugs on which they spent all that money. Humira, Lyrica, Eliquis, Cialis, and Xeljanz. So what do these drugs have to do with them targeting women? Well, first of all, Humira, among other things, is used in the treatment of arthritis. And women are far more likely to have arthritis, especially rheumatoid arthritis, than men. Secondly, there's Lyrica, which is very specific to the treatment of fibromyalgia, and it's about 80% of fibromyalgia patients are women. So let's put a big W for women over Humira, and a big W over Lyrica for women also. Now, Eliquis is actually for men and women, so I'm going to put an M on that. Okay, and what Eliquis is about is mainly the handling of clots and preventing blood clots. Men are actually a bit more likely to relapse and form new clots after treatment than women. So we'll give that to the men. Also, for obvious reasons, we're going to give Cialis to the men. Okay? And then we come to Xeljanz. And guess what? Xeljanz is very specific to rheumatoid arthritis, which is more than anything a woman's condition. So we can see that advertising dollars are being poured more into women's drugs than into men's drugs. Okay, now I happen to know, and that's why these drug companies are so adamant about debunking homeopathy and driving women away from it. I happen to know from a fact, as a physician in clinical practice, that in rheumatoid arthritis, I can prescribe 2 drugs that cost $7 a bottle each and give someone a 6-month supply for $7 a bottle each. That's $14 for 6 months, and they have no more rheumatoid arthritis problems. These are homeopathic drugs. And geez, I'm not even a homeopath. I'm a doctor of Oriental medicine. So, I got no stake here. But that stuff works, and the drug companies don't want you to know. Now, if you kindly read this quote, more than 80% of fibromyalgia patients are female, and so it makes sense that the TV ad for Pfizer's drug Lyrica, 3 women are talking about their experiences with the painful condition. They're targeting women, okay? And all the links to everything I say are down in the description of the video, okay? You can read this stuff for yourself. Now, I have treated fibromyalgia in my clinical practice, but I never treated a case with a homeopathic drug. It was always with one of the tools, one of the Chinese medicine or acupuncture in fibromyalgia, and I had good results. But I happen to know that homeopaths with their drugs can treat fibromyalgia without all of that. Wow, 80% of fibromyalgia patients are women. That's an astonishing statistic. And there, right there, among your top 5 advertised drugs is Xeljanz. Specific, I'm sorry, I got that one wrong. It shouldn't be that. Lyrica, specific to fibromyalgia, okay? Xeljanz is specific to rheumatoid arthritis. Now let's talk very briefly about how you make a homeopathic drug. You start out with what's called a mother tincture, and that's in bottle number 1 here as I'm representing it. I'm making a very crude presentation. It starts out with bottle number 1, that's the mother tincture, and that contains the original substance that you're going to potentize through a series of dilutions and succussions. Okay, and succussion means you're wrapping something on a hard surface, okay? So, your mother tincture, and you make sure that whatever you have there is fully dissolved, and you take a few drops of it, and you add that to the next bottle. That would be the number 2 bottle with distilled water in it. Just a few drops from bottle number 1 into bottle number 2, and you succuss that And it might be, by the way, the mother tincture might be anything from salt to arsenic to dandelions to whatever, and there are many, many different kinds of homeopathic drugs, and I'll explain in a moment. So, from bottle number 2, you take a drop or two and you put it in some distilled water. In bottle number 3, succuss that and take a couple drops on into bottle number 4. And by the time you get to about the 12th succussion and dilution, there is nothing of the mother tincture left in it. There just aren't any molecules left. There's a probability of one molecule being left, but that means less than a molecule, which is a really hard thing to fathom. But what homeopaths say is that water retains a memory all across these dilutions. So whatever was in the mother tincture, the water remembers it throughout each succussion and dilution, even though there's none of the actual original molecular substance left. It's called water memory. And the way that homeopathy ultimately works is that because of this water memory, the body recognizes something that is a problem and takes steps as if it has been attacked by that problem. In other words, let's say the mother tincture is arsenic, okay? Then out here at a high dilution, the body recognizes that as arsenic poisoning, which it isn't getting, it's just plain water, but the body deals with it as if it's arsenic poisoning and takes steps to correct arsenic poisoning. And there are diseases that mimic many aspects of arsenic poisoning. In other words, the mother tincture that you use has the opposite effect on the body. Let me correct myself. The final dilution has the opposite effect on the body as the mother tincture would have had. In other words, arsenic would do one thing, but the body, by the time it's all diluted, reverses that effect. It's a very simple medical concept that's very effective in clinical practice. In fact, not far from home here, if we look at certain antibiotics, which use attenuated or killed bacteria, for example, that's kind of how it works. The body recognizes it. It's not a genuine threat, but the body acts as if it's a threat and corrects the problem. For obvious reasons, because this is so cheap to do and so cheap to make, the big drug companies hate it, and they're doing all they can to convince you and others that it is oakum. It is real. I have seen it time and time again. I'm now going to take up a very brief summary of Dr. Montagnier's research along with his team. And I hope they'll forgive me for oversimplifying, but a lot of this is well above my pay grade, so I'm keeping it as simple as possible. And I urge you to watch the video that's down, the Dr. Luc Montagnier video on that research. It's about an hour long, just under an hour. Really, watch that video. It's stunning and fascinating. It's down in the description, a link to it. Now, that video, by the way, never once mentions homeopathy. It talks about water memory, which is the basis of homeopathy. It's interesting. But here, in an aside, is what Dr. Montagnier had to say about homeopathy. I wanted you to see his own words. Okay, so take a look, please. And you can see that he's affirming certain things about homeopathy. And he's also saying at the same time, he's not sure that the homeopaths are right about everything. And that gets into classical homeopathy, which is not what we're talking about. Classical homeopathy takes into account a lot more factors. So he's saying, hey, I'm not too sure about that, I don't know, but these high dilutions are right. Okay, Dr. Montagnier's research and his team's research begin with water. And I do know a bit about water. I have filed a patent application which I eventually abandoned, and it concerned water in a certain engineering environment. But I did continue to pursue my other patent application, which sort of controls the use of the first one. In other words, somebody has to come to me to make efficient use of the first application. Anyway, so I got that patent issued. But here's water. Now, the way water is set up, here's your oxygen molecule in blue, and the two reds are hydrogen. So you've got HOH, or some people will say H2O. There is a 104.5 degree angle between the hydrogen ions that are present in the water molecule. Now that's a very important factoid. I don't want to get into the physics of it, but you can look it up. Just search for water hydrogen bonding. Now Dr. Montagnier and his team work with physicists over there in France, and what one of them explains in that video is that water forms chains, okay? And what you get once they form a closed chain is inside it is what is called a coherent domain. Now, as one of these physicists explained, particles, actual macroparticles, in other words, whole molecules or atoms, cannot enter into this coherent domain. And that goes back to the hydrogen bonding issue that I mentioned earlier, and I don't want to get off into the weeds here. But that's a very powerful bond, and that prevents things from coming in here. The only way a foreign object can get in the middle of that coherent domain is to actually smash the chain, which takes a lot of energy. And in a solution with things banging around, in the ordinary sense, they don't have the energy to get in there. However, when they do bang into these water chains, as in the case of, say, succussion that we were talking about, the actual whole molecule cannot get inside the coherent domain, but the electrical field that's around it can enter inside that domain. So what I'm illustrating here, for example, is an arsenic atom or molecule. It's a monoatomic molecule. It comes over, it slams up against the chain. The whole thing can't get inside the domain. But you'll notice the electromagnetic field can get inside the domain. And what happens with this is that electromagnetic field interacts with the electromagnetic field of the coherent domain, which is the coherent domain's electromagnetic field is very powerful. So they interact, these two fields, and that leaves a resonating effect inside the coherent domain as the arsenic molecule bounces away. I'm just using arsenic as an example. So now inside the coherent domain you have a resonating frequency that's bouncing around inside here that is captured. It's not going away. So you have water memory. Now, Dr. Montagnier and his team, along with some Italian scientists, did a very, very important demonstration of this principle, and they proved water memory. And the way they did it was with something called PCR, or a polymerase chain reaction. You've probably seen this on NCI or CSI on television. And what they do is they take a little bit of some criminal's DNA or a trace from some evidence, and they want to create enough DNA so they can analyze it and match it to the crook. And the way PCR works, very basically, is you have a solution of water, and in the water is what are called nucleotides, which are the basic building blocks of DNA. And along with that, you have a polymerase, which acts as a catalyst. And I want to emphasize that in order for this to work, supposedly, you must have a starting strand of DNA. In other words, like something from the evidence file, for example. And without that, nothing is going to happen in this solution. that is the traditional thinking about the use of PCR, polymerase chain reaction. So we start with a piece of DNA here, and we put that into the solution, okay? What happens after that is that the polymerase, the catalyst, recognizes that there's now DNA in the solution, and it starts helping to arrange these nucleotides, okay? And they form more DNA chains. And this is a well-known reaction scientifically. And as we can see here, the reaction proceeded and we started getting bunches of DNA. But just remember, we needed the original DNA in order to make this happen. Without it, no DNA would be formed, supposedly. So what Dr. Montagnier and his team did was they took some DNA of a certain disease and they put it in a solution, and they used an electronic scanner to scan the electromagnetic field that was coming off of the DNA. Now you might say, well, the water also is emitting an electromagnetic field, and the details of that are a little involved, but what you do is, once you have the data from that, you know what the signature, the electromagnetic signature of the water is, and you subtract that from the overall data, and what you're left with is the electromagnetic signature of the DNA. So all right, the scanner scans it, and it converts that information into code. In other words, computer code, kind of like shortwave, I guess. You know, it's a mixture of radio frequencies, and a bunch of did-ahs, 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 and it converts it into computer code. So what Dr. Montagnier and his team, I mean, he's a Nobel Prize winner, you know, a co-discoverer of the HIV virus. What they did next was they took that code and they sent it by the internet across the Italian Alps to another team of Italian scientists in Italy, obviously. So here you go, the signal goes from France into Italy across the Alps, okay? And in Italy, the other team receives the data from the electronic communication. And I'd like to remind you, before I go on, you don't need all that fancy equipment I've been talking about to make a homeopathic drug. I just showed you how simple it is. So anyway, the Italian scientists did something very, very clever. And remember, until that day, as far as anybody in the scientific community knew outside of this team, in order for a polymerase chain reaction to proceed, you had to have a starting piece of DNA. The Italians did not have a starting piece of DNA. All they had was that code that was emailed to them by Dr. Montagnier's team. So, no starting DNA, no polymerase chain reaction. You cannot duplicate what's not there, supposedly. Anyway, what the clever Italians did was they took that code data that had been emailed to them by Dr. Montagnier's team, and they fed that code data through a solenoid, and then they exposed some sterile distilled water to the output from the solenoid for about, I think it was about an hour. And so the electrical field was surrounding the sterile distilled water for about an hour. And so it's like all the did-ahs, O's and ones and bits and so on were around this distilled water for about an hour. In other words, in an effort to imprint the water with the memory of this code data. And what do you suppose happened? Well, what they did was they took that water sample, sterile distilled water, and they poured it on over the polymerase and the nucleotides. And after a little bit, what do you know? It starts generating DNA. The nucleotides start assembling themselves into DNA chains that turned out to be 98% identical with the DNA of the microbe that Dr. Montagnier had scanned and recorded the code for and sent to them. Well, beam me up, Scotty. Do you get the implications of this for medicine? Do you get what we're talking about here and how profound the impact could be? Now, I know as a practicing physician that homeopathic drugs work, even though I'm a doctor of Oriental medicine. And the homeopaths know this fact even better. Now imagine the implications of this. In other words, somebody could build an app, all right, where you could download the code for some particular disease, and if you had some apparatus for stressing the water, like with that solenoid, you just stress the water for an hour, then drink the water, and you're cured. In other words, big pharma, the big dope dealers, are out of business. They don't like homeopathy, and they don't like water memory, which Dr. Montagnier and his team have proven. Just think about it. Now, I should point out that Dr. Montagnier and his team built upon the research of a certain Dr. Benveniste, who was also a French researcher. And the established scientific community, probably at the urging of Big Pharma, came after him like you would not believe. They destroyed his career. The man died basically of a broken heart. But now, because Dr. Montagnier has a Nobel Prize, they're afraid to attack him. Also because he proved his point. Now, I'm just inserting this in the middle of the video because I forgot to mention it, but it is so important. The Montagnier team, Dr. Montagnier, identified a bacterium that seems associated with autism, and there are French doctors who have been using antibiotics to treat the condition with great success. That's in the Montagnier video in more detail. It's the future of medicine, and I'm not talking 20 years from now or 10 years from now. I'm saying this future is starting right now, and you want to be part of it, and if your kid is at all scientifically inclined, you want them involved in it. And you and your kid can get involved with at-home research. You can do this. You can do this. You might discover some super drug that cures some major disease, or your child might, all for free. Now here's how you do this. All you need is some alfalfa seeds and a gallon of distilled water, and you perform a very simple experiment, because the first job here is to convince yourself. And what's that cost? Some alfalfa seeds from a health food store, maybe $3 or $4. A gallon of distilled water from the supermarket is less than $2, and you're on your way. Now granted, plants are not humans, but this will get you started. Once you see how it works on plants, you'll begin to understand how it works on humans. First, you want to watch the experiment video that's down in the description. A link to it is down in the description below this video. Or you can download the PDF file with full instructions. It's free from the address shown, the URL shown, whatolearn.com/experiment1.pdf. Now, it's a very simple experiment with step-by-step instructions, and you have, most likely, you have everything you need already in the house. Now, once you or your young person have performed this experiment and you feel encouraged and you decide you want to look into how to develop new drugs, then you would do this. And remember, I've already shown you how to make homeopathic drugs. This gets a little more sophisticated. It's a 40-page ebook. Now, I have to pay for my server costs for the website, and a separate charge is on my server for the ebook. So you can get it, it's $5, and that can turn you or your young person into a powerful homeopathic drug researcher. And who knows what new drugs you may discover. Above all, it teaches your kid the scientific method in a powerful way. Anyway, thanks for watching. I'll be looking for your results and your research to be posted here under this video. And thanks for watching. I'm Dr. Dennis Hudson.